Alright, hello. I'm making another video. It's January the 18th, and the sun is perfectly conjunct with Pluto right now in Capricorn, and Mercury has also just stationed direct just a couple hours ago, so this is the first day of Mercury direct, and the sun, and we got this perfect Sun-Pluto conjunction. So the focus of this video is going to be about Pluto, it's going to be about Capricorn, it's going to be about Mercury. And also, this year, we're getting Pluto in Aquarius, which is interesting, because, to be honest, as an astrologer, I wasn't one of these people who was doing it since I was in high school or something like that. I only really got seriously into it more recently, and the whole time I've been doing astrology, Pluto has been in Capricorn, and then more than that, there's the whole thinking about what I'm of the Pluto in Scorpio generation, and that Pluto in Sagittarius is like a whole lifetime ago, and so the something about a new Pluto phase, Pluto in Aquarius it's more than just it puts life in a different scope when you're looking at these long periods of time like that with the outer planets, right? Which is interesting. But, well, let's just, I don't know. Certain things about Pluto. Let's get into it. One of the things that I noticed about this was that in Christmas time, or around the time that hold on. I have this thing, before I go any further, I should mention, actually never mind. I don't need to get into that right now. There's a certain direction I was thinking about this that maybe it's maybe a bit troubling with the Pluto dynamic, because Pluto is what it stands for being more difficult. It's almost a bit malefic and such, but if you look at Capricorn and how it's associated with tarot cards and such, being associated with the Devil card, or actually if you look at Capricorn itself, having the goat horns and such, it wasn't one of the significators for Capricorn is associated with the god Pan, and this thing about fear and panic and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is, what I was thinking though, I was kind of pausing, was that if I go too hard in that direction, it kind of like, there's certain things I don't want to, it's not like I don't want to play up the negative of what Pluto is about necessarily, and make it out that whatever this transit is a scary, panic, fearful kind of thing. And I think, but there's something, I had a kind of insight in that people talk about, like, I was bringing up mental health stuff before or whatever, right? Or that there's the states of fear, states of panic, states of anxiety, and that the way that the Greeks worked with this kind of stuff is that these sort of very intense things, right? We would say like in extreme states or intense whatever. Every time there was this kind of intensity, it was like the presence of a god and whatnot. And with astrology, the basic, Mars and Venus are very basic elemental things that you can see Mars in, like, sports and, martial arts and whatever, or you see Venus in like cosmetics or industry, or you can see, that even if you're just going to be a consumer or whatever, consumer products and media and all this kind of stuff, is that the gods are still running rampant through them, and because they're such strong forces, these planetary forces, right? But they're not like the. I was reading this book by Thomas More, I think his name is. Yeah, Thomas More. He's a friend of James Hillman's. and he's there's this little book from the 90s called The Planets Within, and there's sort of like the human internal things are kind of like their own forces that even if you don't believe in astrology, there's obviously a force that's kind of Venusian, there's a force that's kind of Mars, and that you can, or a force that's kind of Saturnian, and these are archetypes that are playing out. But the thing is, the astrology is always kind of like the black sheep because people, it's kind of like there's this sort of territory that's kind of off limits to a lot of people. Because it's like the implications of connecting that with planets and all the stuff going on. Well, whatever. There's a reason why I'm still doing the astrology channel, though, right? But if you look at what Pluto means, where they get the name from, one of the things I was thinking about was in terms of Hades, or there's Pan, and then also the devil. There's a video game called Hades that I've been playing recently, which is great art design and everything. There's also a classic video game series called Diablo, and one of the things I realized about the Mercury retrograde is that around the time, like into Christmas time, I just bought a bunch of video games that were on sale or whatever, and then I had this tendency towards these like dungeon games and these like Hades and Diablo, and now I'm kind of like, oh wait a minute, and like the time when I was playing these, I'm kind of like not playing them as much anymore, but I was going through this like phase of playing them just because they're whatever, I don't know. I was kind of in that, I just had to play some video games, what can I say, and but it was all happening with the Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. I was kind of aware of this at the time, and there's like a lot of these like goat guys in Diablo and little devil guys, and I'm kind of like, Diablo does actually seem like a very kind of like Capricorn kind of game. And also when you start collecting treasure in Diablo, there's like this sort of there's like earth science, like materialism, right? Or like the idea of like, I've got the weighing out which armor is better than the other armor, or that like you're getting your stats right, or like it seems like a very there's something about the decan of when you get to the specifics, right? That Pluto and here I'm gonna have to take a little screenshot to put up here. That the Sun and Pluto are at 28 degrees of Capricorn, which is the end of the third decan. And if you do the whole tarot card thing, which is, I don't know. I've kind of been, this is how I like to do it, but if you're making a big metaphysical thing about this, don't read too much into it. But, I don't know. I like the technique anyways of applying tarot cards and astrology, and I know not everybody likes that technique, but that decan has the power one, right? 4 Pentacles. And it's kind of, there's this kind of association of somebody who's like, the big desk guy, the power broker, the accountant, the banker, the guy who's holding on to the big pile of money or whatever, or the stingy guy, or the guy who's wants to maintain some sort of like material power or whatever, and that there's the kind of like doing that through a system of like accounting basically, or keeping track of debts and stuff like this. And the whole thing is like, I don't want to like say that like the whole financial system is like totally evil, if that, cause there's like an implication there, but there's something about the idea of, well, I was playing Diablo, one of the things that I realized was the subtle kinds of like, you're having this little thing like count up how many kills you get, like as if you're like if you kill a whole bunch of things in a row, it's like counting them. And like, or there's a lot of video games like this where you got kill streak, massacre, blah, blah, and it's sort of like it's for me it's just disturbing to see how this like mass violence thing is getting more and more prominent. And I mean, it's kind of I don't it's like sort of like a played out thing though, because but there's I kind of there's a it's the funny thing is that during when I was growing up, they had all this stuff about like the people getting concerned about video games and the satanic panic, and I'm somebody who likes video games and all sorts of weird stuff. But then like as far as you explore, like there's some point where you actually run into the line where you're like, hey, wait a minute, all these like really square conservative people, like maybe they don't know what they're talking about, but then you run into something where you're like, maybe they are intuiting that there are actually problems with the things that they're against, and there's a reason why they have these conservative rules, or they're uptight about stuff. But like there's this I don't know, where am I gonna say, the whole fuck around and find out thing that I got from there's weird studies talks about, but there's the experimental thing. I was also thinking about Hunter S. Thompson had this thing about like knowing the people who know where the line is because they've gone over it, and that's kind of like what the kind of me having a disability is kind of like, is that there's sort of the people probably were concerned about me because other people may have had a sense of where those lines are, and approaching the danger zone of crossing. And then once that happened, but the thing is, like, I mean, the good news at least is I was able to come back from that, and not very many. No, what I mean to say, there's a lot of people out there. I'm not gonna make any statement about what the numbers are, but I'm gonna say that there's at least it has a dangerous. There's a certain danger, right? And there's a certain fear, and there's a certain whatever, right? I am perhaps lucky because I've had people help me out in my life to help me know how to navigate this and not get sucked into the fear, and have the fear. So this kind of thing of like being able to navigate the fear of what's going on, and it all comes down to the frailty of ourselves as finite material human beings, and we have a few kind of biological imperative towards survival of the species, right? And so that kind of there's like the animal instinct in the human to survive, and that is wired into our whole system of being afraid of things and all this, and that I don't know. I'm honestly, I can talk about this stuff and not be that. I'm not worried about the archetype of the devil too much or whatever, in the sense, because there's this great idea that, like, in order to be a friend of God, you necessarily have to be a friend of the devil as well. And like the kind of idea is that the whole story. I mean, okay, I gotta preface this. I'm not a theologian. I'm just doing my best trying to talk about these ideas, but. The whole idea of the book of Job and how this guy is going through all this trouble is partly the devil is sort of saying that, like, hey, I don't think this guy Job really believes in you. Like, if all this bad stuff happened, do you think he'd still think you were so great? And so the point of it was that the devil and the God, like, if there's this stuff, okay, in the media where they portray like the God and the devil thing as like two generals commanding an army fighting each other, or that's what I'm talking about. Diablo, right? Is that Diablo? At some point, Diablo feels kind of lame to me because the Manichaean dualism playing out on that level is just kind of like, to me, that it starts being kind of lame. But you can still have a kind of a Manichaean dual or whatever. You can have these characters, God and the devil, but in the actual Bible, they're not. They're on speaking terms. They're talking to each other as if they're buddies, like God has the devil over for a couple beers, after work, and the devil's like, hey man, that guy, like, he's talking to them. It's like they're on the speaking terms that the God and the devil are on in the book of Job. They don't sound like they're like mortal enemies out to kill each other. And if anything, the devil is speaking on a behalf of concern for God. That the devil is like, hey, like, I'm trying to look out for your best interest, or I'm trying to try to there's things you may not be considering, and he like it's very much seems like the devil is playing the game for God, but that he's acting as a kind of like a protector almost, or that there's idea of threshold guardians, right? That like if you look at, let's take away from the whole God and devil thing, go to Hades. That you got Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the gate of Hades that you have to get past, right? And as a threshold guardian, right? Or that the river of Styx that you have to cross is a threshold and all this kind of stuff, and that in Hades though there's a different Hades has less of a negative association than hell, because Hades is seen as a place where you go when you die, but it's not necessarily, it kind of contains the good stuff and the bad stuff in all these different areas. It wasn't necessarily something that, like, the gods were in Olympus and stuff like that, but the mortals, the people who lived and died, had to go to Hades when they died, or and but it wasn't necessarily hell, Hades. And there's something about like the riches of Hades. There's something about it, it's kind of like a little bit like fertility, I guess, as well. There's a direction you can take this, where you take a naturalist direction and make it all natural. But James Hillman in his book Dream and the Underworld has this argument against taking the naturalist direction and making it all just about like the organic plants decaying and then making fertilizer. And not to say that doesn't happen, not to say that isn't a part of what goes on, but that there is a side of it that actually has to do with is your life entirely just a material thing, or when you die, is there something that's not material about whatever happens with the human soul, that it's not just reduced to the materiality of the body? And I think oftentimes, though, when people are talking about whatever, atheism or secular thought, they often talk about materialism, but there is something about also like naturalism as well, where it's like I'm thinking about making a video too talking about natural astrology, because there's a way that it's not to be anti-naturalist, if you know what I'm saying, is that there is a whole natural world and there's a whole natural order, and that there could be even, like when you're talking about planets, that I tend to take this thing that's about trying to talk about in terms of oracular stuff, but it could also be, there could be a naturalistic side of it as well. I don't know if I'm going to talk about it all right now, but I think it does fit in with the stuff about the power of Pluto in an earthy sign like Capricorn, and the naturalist view of things as being a certain perspective, and that there's an oracular view of things which is a certain perspective, and there's all these, what's one of the things that I've been thinking of is that not to throw out the naturalist perspective, but to also recognize that you don't also have to make the naturalist perspective the absolute perspective, and that you can have naturalism and also some transcendentalism going on, in the sense of like there could be something that just of the underworld, of the land of the dead, that doesn't reduce down to just being a naturalistic thing. And one of those things is even just, I don't know, being a literary guy, reading all these books. I mean, James Hillman himself is dead, and if you spend a lot of time reading James Hillman, if you get this feeling, I mean, I have to admit too that he's kind of like this sort of a paternalistic kind of guy. A lot of people probably go to Jung and go to these men's group things because there's these strong masculine kind of figures. He's just a bit of a puer, so he's maybe a bit relatable, right? But the Hillman. It's like the more you read certain people, you get a sense of like getting to know these people, or also giving a connection to different people, different historical points of time as you read a bit further. And then there's a really interesting when you start to get into the ancient Greece stuff, because it's like I can get a feeling of getting to know beyond my own historical position or whatever. A little, you can start stretching. but it's stretching into the past is what I'm trying to say, right? It's like, and there's the whole world that we inhabit is shaped by the past very much. I mean, I live in Canada. It's a colonial place. It's like, I don't, what was this place like before the colonizers were here? We can only imagine. I have no idea. I can only see what the aftermath of this thing that happened looks like. But the whole history of it is there. The underworld has left its riches. You know what I mean? There's all these, there's relics and treasure boxes and things that little notes scrawled, and like, I'm like, kind of, it reminds me of these Diablo games, right? These RPGs where you find all these things that have been left, or when you. But there's this thing about take it back to Diablo, right? Where you go around basically looting, right? You go around killing monsters and collecting their treasure, and like there's this. It's a video game, so some video games tend to be very like, you play Duck Hunt, it's about shooting ducks, right? So you play Diablo, it's about going to dungeons, killing demons, and taking treasure, right? So it's kind of just how it goes for video games, but there's something about that whole process, though, which is like you can kind of see the devil of it kind of creep in, right? Where I think there's a different kind of riches of the underworld when it comes to a certain historical richness or something like that, or a kind of cultural thing that has been left behind for us from our ancestors and stuff like this. And also, I love the Greek thing too, because the Greek thing, I don't mean to Greece was it's a story about a whole bunch of different groups that came together and that were relating to each other, different like countries and nations and smaller groups and all this kind of stuff, commingling and sharing influences and having conflicts and work and whatever. But like that, after watching Game of Thrones for a while, it's kind of interesting to think about like ancient Greece and all these different, that it's like the pantheon of the gods comes out of this sort of like, cacophony. There's something a bit chaotic and like natural about it, right? The naturalism of a forest that's not just growing in a very, there's the Platonism wanted to make everything to a geometric perfection, but the myths have a kind of weird kind of like naturalistic growing in a certain shape or form that makes them kind of quirky kind of way that is kind of interesting, right? And that's what I love about astrology, is that they do have on some way it has a geometric perfection, but then it's also full of all these quirky idiosyncrasies. I don't know. I'm kind of just rambling. I don't know where I'm going with this at this point. But what am I trying to say? The different. I'm kind of creating in my head comparing Hades and Diablo as ways to understand Pluto and Capricorn and the Mercury retrograde we've been having. And now that Mercury's direct, and we're gonna have a Mercury conjunction with Pluto, and we're gonna have basically Pluto passing through the final degrees of Capricorn, and as a finale to all this time we've had with these earthy material Pluto underworld, rebirth, decay, journey through the whatever, all of these kind of things that have been going on, is coming through a kind of process here as we move into the next stage with Pluto and Aquarius. And I'm not even, I'm still in the process of sort of developing what my take on Pluto and Aquarius is, so I'm not going to get into that right now, but at least for Pluto and Capricorn and the transits that we're having around that, this is some stuff that's been coming to mind for me anyways.